welcome back to Getting Past the Premium, everybody. An exciting episode that we finally made happen due to some LinkedIn inbox read on my end, Micah. So I am excited to have Micah Salas with me today. We're going to talk all things sales. So we finally got it on the schedule though, dude.
Yeah, glad to be here, man. Glad to be here.
Yeah, so we were joking around beforehand that we had said that we were going to set this up a couple months ago, and then somehow missed the LinkedIn messages, getting it back and forth. So, yeah, no, man, I'm really excited. Obviously, you put out a lot of content around sales. That's what we talk about a lot on the show, and really want to dive into your brain a bit. But before we do that, why don't you give everybody who you are, where you're from, where you're at, how you got in the industry, and then we'll jump in.
Yeah, okay. Real quick, I born and raised in Wisconsin, lived there for 27 years or 28 years. I'm married with two little kids, 3.5-year-old and a 6-month-old, so life's busy.
You've been busy.
But I've now been in Texas for 10 years, so I'm 39, and I got into insurance basically because I was broke and I wasn't making great money, and a guy called and said, "Hey, you want to grab a coffee?" And I said, "Sure." And then, they showed me what they paid, and I was like, "Yeah, let's do this." So I started with Federated Insurance.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So I did a year stint up at their headquarters, learning all things insurance, and then got out into the field for about 1.5 years, 2 years, and quickly realized I think I'd rather be more an independent agent than a captive. And so basically we were in a territory we didn't like, and then my wife and I were going to move more to Milwaukee, the city where we were from in Wisconsin, and we just said, if we're going to move, let's just move across the country. So we moved down to Texas, and I just started applying for different agencies. Got an offer from, actually the first place was Marsh McLennan Agency, and I took it. So flew down to Texas, took it. 2 months later, we were moving across the country.
That's awesome.
And yeah, I spent 7 years with Marsh McLennan Agency, and then now the last 3 years with a company called Christensen Group. And I basically was employee number 1 here in Texas. We're a very established agency up in Minnesota, and they had kind of just got my name and through a family member. And next thing I know, I was, like I said, employee 1 here. So it's been a fun ride, starting over, walked away from a book and rebuilding again for the second time. So yeah, that's me in a nutshell.
That's great. How do you like Texas?
Man, I love Texas. The summers can get hot, but I don't mind heat, and I like to play golf. So
There you go.
I can play. I have less time to play golf since starting over and then since having 2 kids, but it's still nice to be able to get out there year round, not have to, only have a 3-month season.
100%. I agree with that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, that's cool. I like that backstory because it kind of, gives everybody a sense of how you got to where you're at. But interesting, starting at Federated, there's so many people that, end up starting there, which is like great training, from what I know, and all those things, which is awesome. It kind of teaches you some of the skills, and then you learn where your path is in the industry, right? And like for you, I learned I want to be an independent agency. So
yeah, no, it's weird because you think, I don't want to say they try to, give you the Kool-Aid, but I think every company does that to a certain extent, right?
Yeah, for sure.
And so you think you know a ton about insurance. And one thing I realized from going from captive to the independent side and moving across the country and all that stuff all at once is like, wow, I do not know as much as I thought about insurance. I mean, just the things you take for granted. I didn't know what E&S market was, or, wholesale brokers and premium financing. And there's just a whole different world of things that I didn't know, and then different forms. And because all I knew was Federated's coverage form and all that, and so you just, it was a more of a learning curve than I thought. I mean, it was definitely a great foundation, for sure. So
that, I would imagine, or what I've heard about that, is it teaches you some of the fundamentals, because it's very, like, the process can be very dialed in, especially on the sales side of, your fundamentals of number of calls, or, how you're getting business, your business plan, all that stuff. Maybe talk on that for a second.
Yeah. I think structure is key, man. I mean, I think that's where a lot of agents can flounder, but yeah. So from that standpoint, it's very much like they call it the business plan. It's like follow the business plan, and that's what you had to do. And it's more drop-in heavy, in-person drop-ins than cold calling. I mean, you could cold call if you wanted to, but that's what they really based you on. I was like, hey, you got to get your 10 drops 5 days a week. Here's how many quotes you should be submitting a month. Here's kind of how you follow up with clients. Here's your 4 touch points throughout the year. So everything from getting a new client to then just keeping them and then cross-selling, because we
Yeah.
did life insurance, health insurance at the time, disability. So they're always trying to, saturate an account. And
Yep.
so yeah, those basics, and a lot just depends on who's your manager, but they, I know nowadays, everyone like doesn't want to be managed. But I think especially in insurance, I mean, I think more micromanage, I hate to use that word, but just more involvement from a manager is a good thing for young people that just don't have the knowledge or the structure of selling
Yeah.
insurance.
Yeah.
Because it's
Agreed.
also a complex product, right? It's not just getting opportunities. Then you got to sound presentable and knowledgeable and convey confidence and trust from a client. And that's tough to do all those things when you're just trying to learn, how to spell insurance and then also the sales stuff. So I had, some really good managers that literally would show up at my house at like 7 a.m. and they'd spend the whole day with me in the car doing
Oh yeah.
drop-ins, doing meetings. So all that stuff was invaluable. I mean, the training was nice, but then the actual field in the combat, in the trenches kind of
Yeah.
stuff with a 20-year vet, that's the kind of stuff where you learn. So
Yeah, exactly. You got to have the hand-to-hand combat. You got to have the reps. Translate the knowledge into learning, right?
yeah.
So then walk through how you've made that, transfer to the independent agency side where I would guess I don't know a ton about Christensen Group, obviously in the internal processes there, but less structure sometimes at independent agencies, less, training, all of those things that, we don't have a lot of times as independent agents that a big national company like Federated has. And so, talk through how you took those skills into, I don't know if you build a business plan today or structure your day of how you're going to get your meetings, like walk through how you're doing that today based on those fundamentals.
Yeah, I mean, so the main thing is, building ideal client profile, right? Who you're trying to
Yep.
target, and you can niche if you want to, micro niche as far down as you want to. For me, I just what really helped me was dialing into one industry, so construction, and then certain size parameters, and then that I'm definitely way less rigid than I was at Federated, like
Mhm.
on myself. But I think one of the things we can get lost in sometimes too is, and we kind of make a joke out of this, a lot of agents will, because like your manager will come around and they'll say, hey, I need all the prospects you're calling for the next 12 months. What are you going to close? How are you going to, I want to see a list of everyone.
Yeah.
Then you sit back at the end of the year, reflect, and like, I didn't win any of those deals. I won,
Yeah.
like 2 of the 10 deals I won were from the list I put together in the beginning of the year,
Yeah.
right? So I'm not saying it's a pointless activity to do that, because I think it can make sense. But I think for me, there's no point to just overthink, like I got to create this specific list of everyone I want to write, just because what I found with insurance is so many people are happy, so many people, everyone has insurance, and there's a lot of really strong relationships out there, so you don't know where the wins are always going to come from. And it's like you could have your top 15 list that Federated we had. Now we had a unique product, right? No one else could offer us,
Mhm.
so you can get your foot in the door a little bit different.
Yep.
But if you're an agent, like okay, let's just say you have your top 25 list you create. Well, you go out there and all 25 tell you they love their agent, been with them 30 years. Now you got to start over, right? So it's
Yeah.
like, that's where like I get the concept of kind of having a very targeted list, but that's dismissing the fact that there's just really strong relationships that you're just not going to break up. It doesn't matter what you say, what you do. And so that's where you need to have a high volume of prospects, and constantly be prospecting. So I'm always adding to my list. I'm always prospecting, and people say, well, how many people are you calling a month? And it's like, I use Insurance X Date as a resource, right? And that's what and so I'll just search out 5 months at a time. So I'll look out, like for now, I'm calling March, right? People that are coming up in 5, 6 months. Not because I'm chasing the X dates, but more so because I'm like, okay, insurance is kind of on their mind. That dials me into about 100 prospects in that month that I want to call. And then I'll phase them out.
Oh yeah.
Time goes on to the next month, right? So it's a little bit unique of a process because I'm not necessarily annually planning, but it's more like just looking forward about 5, 6 months, and then targeting about 100 prospects a month,
Yeah.
in that
Yeah.
time.
I agree with that 100%. I mean, the top target prospect lists or whatnot, I guess the way that I've always thought that is I've had the same sense is if you're just going through a list and you have to have your ideal client profile. I agree with that. If you're going through a list and like, okay, here's 1,000 accounts, here's the 10 I can pull out of there that meet my ICP and that I think would be good. Well, you can't create a top target list unless you know more about those clients than just pulling them out of a list. Because if they're on your top list, you should have had a conversation. You know, like they have a need that I can solve. So I
Right.
know I have more likelihood of winning those deals. So they're going to go in my top so I don't forget about them or something like that. But other than that, I think you're exactly right. It's a volume play to get in front of enough prospects in your ICP that you learn enough about to determine, yeah, they have a need and these ones don't. I'm going to pull them out of the list and I'm going to continue to foster these prospects until they tell me I need to go pound sand, or whatever.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and
I,
so I think I agree with you there 100%. It's more about structure around making the calls and or however your prospecting strategy is than it is about segmenting yourself down to one. The other thing, people can waste so much time building those lists when it's like, just pick up the phone and call, or just like go in and drop in, or.
analysis or paralysis by analysis. I mean,
Yeah.
and this is a perfect example too, because in insurance, again, you can research to death, right? And then you do all this research, you find out, where they went to high school, where they went to elementary school, whatever.
Yeah.
You email them, craft up this one, page long email. And like, hey man, sorry, I'm with my brother-in-law, right? And,
Yeah.
it's like, and so
Or I'm
it's not,
selling the business tomorrow.
yeah, yeah,
Great.
exactly. I think if you're selling software or something that's very innovative and just different, that can make a ton of sense. But I think in our field in insurance, less time on the research, more time on just, I hate to say this because people are going to throw rocks at me probably, but it is kind of still a numbers game to a certain extent in terms of the prospecting side of it,
Hmm.
right? Just trying to create opportunities. That's really what it comes down to. No, like we both agree. I think you don't just call, pick up a phone book and call any business. I mean, you kind of get that list somewhat filtered down, but you can't
Yeah.
get it. You don't want to over filter it, right? Where it's like just way too much time, in the weeds researching.
Well,
Uh,
there's no data source out there. And if there is, somebody needs to let me know. But there's no data source out there that you can get enough information that truly matters about that prospect. Like you can learn the demographics, but that's like top of funnel stuff.
yeah,
You got to pick up the phone and talk to them to determine, like, do they have the right personality? Is there anything
yeah,
unique about their business? Maybe they have, they're in construction, but they have a really unique arm to their business that you just aren't going to be able to have a market for. And so like, there's no reason to target them. And you don't know that stuff until you have a phone conversation. And we've definitely evolved on this over the years where, we've gone from heavy research and like, let's try to dial in lists. And then you realize everyone on this list is, we're just not going to have an opportunity on, and we wasted a bunch of time. We might as well have a bigger, broader list and just call them, try to get introduced to them,
yep,
have an initial conversation and then determine. That's just your first step of qualification. Then they work down and work down.
yeah,
And I look at the numbers side of it too. I'd be curious your perspective on this, as the numbers lead to building a relationship in my mind over time, right? So if you're
hmm,
calling on this business owner and you've called him multiple times throughout the year, had a couple good conversations, starts to recognize your name, you're calling, bringing them value, asking if they've thought about this or that. Like eventually, when the time is right, you're going to get the opportunity. So it doesn't have to be just like make 1,000 dials and try to get 10 of those to give you an opportunity. It needs to be looked at as a nurturing campaign.
exactly. Yeah, I 100% agree with you, which is why I'm a huge advocate of like, I just call it a follow-up later list, right? And it's more so just to keep me motivated, because if you're just trying to call to get meetings and that's the only parameter you're using to say, am I successful or not? You're going to be very discouraged very quickly.
Yep.
And so for me, it's more about conversations, right? And then
Yeah,
planting
there
those
you go.
seeds, nurturing. Most of my meetings come from callbacks, right? Which is why I'm calling hopefully 6, 7 months out from the X date, and then maybe it comes the next cycle, but maybe it's 2 cycles down the road. But the thing is, back to the numbers thing, if you have enough out there, you're going to have enough to hit for this current year. And then all those seeds you planted on the phones, the follow-up letters, might take 2, 3 years. You don't know when it's going to hit, but it should start to accumulate where, you can get to a place where every year you're pretty consistent in your production, right?
Mm-hmm.
And,
Yeah.
and I think we all know that when you take 3, 4 months off, you kind of see it
Oh,
pretty
yeah.
quickly, right?
Yeah, that the old producer roller coaster, right? It's like get a
Yeah.
bunch of prospects. I'm really busy. I'm getting ready to write a bunch of business, so I stop my prospecting, and then I have no prospects, and I got to get prospects again. And yeah, the consistency is so key around all of that.
Yeah. Yep. I agree.
How walk through how you track a lot of your numbers. Like how detailed are you getting? Because I think that's another area that there's a sweet spot of tracking versus, you could track anything and have paralysis by analysis on that end too. What do you track and what makes sense to you? Like, what are you looking at?
Yeah, the main things I'm keeping track of is every day is, how many calls I make, because I want to make just to hold myself accountable, right? But then conversations, yes, nos, and then follow up laters, right? And those are I think if you're having a lot of conversations and it's all nos and no follow up laters, you got to ask yourself, like, why is that? Am I saying something? Am I just pushing for a meeting and people are like, nope, And so I think that's a good thing to keep track of.
Mm-hmm.
I, my first year at Marsh, or my second year, I can't remember. I actually kept statistics for like a full year, all of those categories, week by week, day by day. It was pretty cool, but that's all it. Since that time, I've never needed to go back and kind of look at my monthly statistics. I don't keep a spreadsheet anymore. I've tried it here and there for like a month or two, but I know the baseline numbers. I know where
Yeah.
I need to be, and so now it's more of a daily thing. Like right here, you can see, just here. That's what I do.
How
That's my
simple it can be.
yeah. That's my tech stack, kind of. It's like tally, tally, tally. Am I staying on track? Okay, it's lunch. I have 10 calls I made. I got to make 30 more, or whatever that number is, right? Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
And I mean, sometimes like you're able to do that now because you put in the work to dial in your numbers, right? And then you're able then to just know here's the consistent work I got to do based on my past performance, based on past experience of actually tracking. So I think I would encourage everybody like track more to start,
Yep.
but always just make sure you're not just tracking to track, right? Like at some point you're not going to be looking at the data as much because you're just going to kind of know like, all right, yeah, I made my 40 dials or I made my, whatever. And you don't really need to track it as much. Then you can go a little bit higher level and just make sure you're tracking like a conversion ratio or a closing ratio or higher level metrics. But
Yep.
you do have to do the work on the front end to really understand the metrics and the mechanisms that are working for you to be able to determine what are your highest leverage points, which like you're talking about is I just have to make, if I'm making a certain number of calls today and these things hit, I know that I'm on the right path.
Yeah, absolutely. And for me, the main indicator is like I said, I keep a follow, one of the stats I keep is follow up laters every day. And then I add it to a list. I have it in my CRM and all that, but there's something powerful about having printed paper and being able
Yeah.
to look at it every day. And so I keep a running list of all the quote unquote follow up with me later people, right? And at least the stuff that's going to, not just, hey, call me back, but we had a conversation. It's like a warmer opportunity that I
Mhm.
created. And I keep a running list of that printed off, updated every week. And it has just the company name, the X date, and the revenue. And then that's kind of what I'm looking at constantly. It's like, okay, if this is dipping down below, 200 in revenue, 300 in revenue, why is that? It should always be in that 400 or 500, because I know I'm not going to close most of it,
Yeah.
right? But at least this year, but it's just on there. And
Yeah.
that's who I'm focused on, and make sure they don't fall through the cracks. So.
Absolutely. What so you just mentioned a couple numbers there, if you don't mind. What's like your annual goal for revenue, new business revenue?
I like mine personally is probably different what the agency would say, like for our like awards dinner. I mean, I think that's like we set ours at I think it's $100,000 of revenue, but I personally like I'd like to be 250 is kind of where um it's a good goal, because you can get past it, but it takes work to get there, I think, and it's still a really good year,
Yeah.
so for me, it's just that good combination of everything. I think everyone's different depending on your region and the type of
Yeah.
prospects you call and all that, but for me, that's my number that in my
Well,
head.
and I wanted you to walk through that because I think hopefully it helps people understand what's possible. There's a lot of firms, we were certainly this way for a long time, where you just like, you didn't know people wrote $250,000 in revenue a year. It's just like, holy, like,
Yeah. Yeah,
we thought $50,000 in revenue was a good year, just because like it just shifts your perspective. And so I think
for
it's
sure.
good just to hear that, because people out there can think differently. And a great exercise to say, you were talking about having 2, 3, 4, 500,000 in the pipeline at a time, because where I'm not going to close all of it, but if I have enough, naturally I'm going to hit my goal. And so you've built your activity based on a higher number than your goal is, so that even if you fall a little short from that, you hopefully hit your goal.
Yeah.
But it's a great exercise for people to say that your goal is $100,000. Well, do an exercise that says, what if I had to write 300?
Mm.
Could I do it? How would I do it? Let's think about it and actually break it down. I need this. Okay, I need a couple prospects this size to eat a chunk of it. I need 10 this size. I need this and that. Here's how I'd go get that. What you realize is it's much more doable than you think, just by looking at the big number.
Yeah.
Is it easy? No, not at all. But it is more feasible when you break it down into realistic terms. And so that's a good exercise. We've done those where, you just kind of put something crazy out there and see, like, just break it down. It's kind of fun and see where you
Yeah.
get.
Yeah. No, it's interesting, like what you talk about perspective, right? Because I think you know that I'm part of the Max Revenue Show, and
Mhm.
we do the podcast and some other
Love it.
things there. Yeah, so we talk to a lot of producers, and you hear some crazy numbers, and some are hard to believe. But I started at my new agency, right? I went from a really big agency to more like the 75th largest. We're not tiny, but we're not huge. But there's a guy here that literally I've never seen him do less than like 750 a year of revenue.
Nice.
So it's
Okay.
like, you know, I try to do, like, I had my best year ever this year, and I'm still like literally half of where this guy's at, and it's like
Mm-hmm.
crazy, but it's pushed me. So maybe that's the reason, like, my last 2 years have been my best years I've ever had, right? So I don't know why that happens. But I do think there's some power to that. I think, what is it, like, I think Alex Hormozy and like Ben Hardy talk about, 10x is easier than 2x or
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah.
And the
It's a great
concept's
book, by
not,
the way.
yeah, yeah. And the concept is just more like, hey, when you think bigger, you're just naturally going to do different things, right? And different activities, call them bigger accounts, approach it differently.
Yep.
So,
Shifts
uh,
your perspective from,
yeah.
going from, 50,000 to 60,000, going from 50,000 to 500,000. It's like, whoa, okay.
Well, and
How do I
the
gotta do
cool
that?
part is, let's say so this year I just set some, I don't know what, if I was drinking some Kool-Aid one night or something, but I was like, I told myself for this year, so our fiscal year just ended, and I was like, okay, I want to do um $1 million, right?
Yep. Yeah.
Just because I was like, this is crazy. Like, I'll never do it. I want to it's going to take 40 new clients, $1 million. Let's see if I can do it. Well, I didn't accomplish the goal, right? I didn't even come close, but I
Mm-hmm.
had my best year ever. So I think that's
Exactly.
kind of like, it's just funny how that works, right?
I agree. I
So
agree totally. I think everybody should do that. And again, like I said, you'll start to break it down and realize, seems crazy, but it's doable.
yeah,
And that's what's fun, because it'll shift your perspective on just uh what you need to do every day to increase your numbers. And that's what's cool. Um so you mentioned something in a lot of that, where you've established the numbers, you've established the volume you need to do to get an opportunity. Talk through then what happens next. So you get the opportunity, how are you positioning it? How are you setting yourself different? How are you ultimately winning the deal? And I know that's a broad question, but
yeah. No,
dive
great,
into that.
great question. And I've kind of evolved a little on this because one is I had to, because you're at Federated, everything is quote, right?
Yep.
And then this was nuts, but I moved across the country, go to Marsh. And we had a real innovative thinker. I think he retired just a couple years ago, but he really sharp guy, right? But he was all about AOR or nothing. And so for me, though, it was a total shock, because I didn't even know what an agent of record letter was. And I literally get in there the first day and said, we don't quote here. I was like, okay, well, how do we, I didn't even know how to win business
Yeah. Yeah,
otherwise.
it's true.
And so he's like, well, we have a process, we call this, it's more of a consultative process and we get hired, right? And so that I was forced to do that, right? Which was really good for me, I think.
Totally.
Um, it didn't come without, frustrations, but that happened. And so for basically, he left probably my last year or two, but my first 5, 6 years, I couldn't do anything but essentially go for the AOR, right?
Okay, yeah, there you go.
And you're trying to win it through, we called it a Marsh 3D. It was our process. I think everyone's come up with a different process and a name for it. You're just trying to bring value up front and all that and educate the client and basically make a pitch to be hired, right? Like kind of like a listing for a real estate agent. It's like,
Hmm.
hey, hire me to market your property versus the other guy. And here's why. So I took that process and kind of evolved it because I felt like it was very high level. Like it was more like for multi-million dollar companies. And I was working with a lot of blue collar businesses that are paying 150,000, 100,000 in premium. And it's just a little different. So I kind of evolved and made it my own and simplified it, and made it more relevant, less fluffy, you know?
Yep.
And so that's kind of what I've been doing, I'd say the last 4 or 5 years. And when I say less fluffy, it's providing real tangible value to a client. I call it due diligence. If people followed me, they know that. It's just a real generic term. I felt like it clicked with CFOs to use that terminology and business owners. Like they get it, but it's a little bit different than saying, can I just do a policy review? Because it's more than that. Um, and so but the first thing is getting a client to shift their perspective because a lot of them are quote, quote, quote. Now it's definitely shifted over the
They've been
last
trained
five
that way.
years.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, have you
Good.
seen that? Like prospects used to be like, wait, what do you mean I can just use a letter, right?
Yeah.
Um, have you seen that shift? Because it used to be that way, I'd say 2014 to 2017, 18. And now people kind of know that like, oh yeah, I have to sign a letter, or
Yep.
doesn't
I
make
would
sense.
agree. You know, there's still a deep bias a lot of times with businesses where they think like you got to earn my business or, all
Yep.
of those because they've been trained one way. But it seems like they're becoming a little bit more familiar with broker of record and that process, which I think is a good thing because
Yep.
we should be going in and competing on the merits of agents or advisors versus carriers. And, I've got the market, so I'm going to get it in quickest, or I'm going to quote it and win on
Yep.
price or whatever. Cause that's not going to be the best outcome for the client anyways. Um, but yeah, I would agree with that. It seems like it's becoming a little bit more known.
Yeah, it is. And so my whole thing is I don't go into it assuming that because there's still a lot of businesses that don't know that or
Yep.
operate that way, or maybe they know it, but they need to rehear it again, right?
Yep.
Or it's, you know, so back in 2020 or 2019, I started telling people about the insurance game is what I called it, right? And I created a book, right? The
Yeah.
Business Insurance Playbook is written based on that premise. It was published like 2 years ago, but it's like first thing is the client needs to we got to be on the same page. So here's how the game works. I like doing it because it allows me to just bring something of value, educate them in a I try to come across as non-biased, non-salesy. It's like purely objective. This is how insurance works. And if they can agree with that, like, yeah, wow, okay, okay. Well, now that you see that, quoting isn't necessarily the best route to fix it, right? The quoting game's broken. Here's a better way that other people are doing, right? And it's never forceful. It's just showing them. Here's a different approach. Here's what other people have tried. I call it due diligence. Is that something you'd like to do? Here's what it provides for you. It's going to tell you how your coverage looks. It's going to show you how your premiums and your rates stack up against peers locally. It's going to, provide you some new ideas to reduce costs and it's also going to share some ideas with how we would strategically kind of get your premium to where you want it to be, right? So that's what it is. And most people are like, yeah, that sounds good. And then just go through from there. It's getting the information and running the process and then coming back and presenting, right? So nothing crazy, but I think it's all how you tell the story, how you set it up with a prospect in their mind and how they
Yeah.
perceive it.
Yeah, I agree. Well, and having a clear, you've obviously thought through how you want to discuss that, right? I mean, you wrote a book on it, but like, I don't think most people think through that part of the process as well. A lot of times we see a lot of focus being on how do you get the opportunity, and then
Yep.
not a ton on what am I going to do after that to truly differentiate myself and truly try to show the client value through this process so they want to hire me.
Yep.
Um, and it seems like there's becoming more and more of that, which is good. Because ultimately, if we're just going into quote, I don't think that's the best path to victory anymore.
No, yeah.
um, but yeah, I agree with you. I mean, you have to have a way to stand out. You have to have a way to um, differentiate yourself. Now, I know a lot of people struggle with going from quoting to BOR. So I'm just curious, when you were, obviously somebody forced you to do that, but
Yeah.
what was your mindset as you were making that shift? Was it kind of was it a little stressful? You mentioned getting frustrated at times.
Yep.
Walk through that a little bit, how you got yourself past that to be confident enough to go in and say, you should sign this letter to hire me.
Well, I think, man, it had to come. First of all, I had to understand why my boss was telling me to do this, right? So there's
Yeah.
a knowledge component, but then you have to truly believe in your heart of hearts that like this makes the most sense, 95% of the time. There's exceptions, of course.
Sure.
And so once I had that, and then not just the belief, but then actually seeing it work,
Yeah.
where people hired me and then we reduced their costs significantly and sometimes didn't even change carriers. And
Hmm.
so it came down to, I was like, well, how can that happen? Well, there's a different person representing you with a different story they're telling that has different skill sets and, in different involvement levels, communication styles. So clearly the person telling that story matters. So once I saw the proof of it, and then you see it happen again and again and again, you know, it's like you just have more confidence, right? It's just kind of like a snowball effect. And so I've kept like a running list now going back like 10 years of every client that I've won on AOR, that's hired me first,
That's
right,
cool.
without
Yeah.
seeing any premium or anything. And it just keeps building, right? So it's
Yeah.
up to like $1.67 million of premium saved on that first time I've been hired. And I
Wow.
try to remove all the I remove all like the exposure changes and try to it's pure like apples to apples. I'm not trying to
Yeah.
fluff things. So it's like a 16% cost reduction average is what my new clients average with me that first year.
Wow.
And that hired me on AOR, right? Sometimes we've quoted, not everyone's on the list if we've quoted it or it's worked out differently, but um, and so I share that with prospects, right? And so that's pretty
Absolutely.
powerful. I'm like, hey, don't take my word for it, but it works. And then you have to also be able to explain why it works. And that's the other part too. Like you have to think through and because all of a sudden you just get a prospect questioning you that's maybe a smart guy, right? And you're like, then you question yourself. But if you know why it works, which is for me, the main reason I think it works is well, one is the agent, you're telling the story, are they telling the right story? But the second is underwriter excitement, right? And there's that
Yeah.
human element where it's like, from an underwriter's side, they're really big and telling this to a client. Hey, underwriters are extremely busy. They want to spend their time on deals they think they can win. How would you feel if you were in underwriter's chair and they got a submission from an agent and says, "Hey, can you quote this?" But they come back, ask, "Are you the controlling agent?" You say no. Well, instantly they know in their heads their odds of winning it are less because the incumbent's going to win. And then they'll still maybe quote it, but their effort level's not there. Their excitement level's not there versus they get a submission from me and I'm like, hey, Mr. Underwriter, I control this account. They just hired me. We're exclusive. We are going to 4 markets, 5 markets, but I want to make it fair. I'll give you a fair shot. Here's, what do you need? We control this thing. At least the underwriter knows then, like, okay, you know, the uphill battle is a lot less to win that account,
Absolutely.
right? And so it's just sharing that with prospects, I think is goes a long way.
I really like that, the underwriter excitement. Almost gauging that. That's a great way to put it because it's also layman's terms for your client that doesn't understand how any of it works, and it's a big deal. Because I've literally been in deals before where we've showed the client what is sent in on an accord form, because we'll talk about, like, we're big on telling, like, how do we tell your story to an underwriter matters and all those things, exactly what you're saying. Like, so we'll ask the client, like, how is your story being told? Do you know what's being sent in? And they're like, well, no, my broker handles that. They've never showed me. And I'm like, well, if it's this, how do you think you look to an underwriter? Like, you literally show them the accords and they're like, it looks like a typewriter typed it, like that's how those things show up.
Yep.
And I remember that one client just being like, whoa, like that's not cool. And
Yep.
it does resonate. They just have no idea, they think that it's this big thing behind the scenes, which our industry loves to black box it, like that's us. We got that. We got it handled, and we keep the shroud of mystery around it. When in reality, we need to be working collaboratively with the client to say, like, what are you doing that I should be telling the underwriter about? What do you need to improve on that we should tell the underwriter we're going to improve on? And all of those things that go into crafting that story so that the underwriter can get excited about working on this deal. I think it's spot on.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's cool. I never thought of showing the actual chords. I like that. I'll have to steal that idea from you. But that's a good way to drive home the point. I like analogies too, like
Yep.
real estate, especially if you get people that, if you are in a quoting situation, for sometimes you have to be, right? There's just, maybe you don't have a market or whatever, but and people don't want to give you their premiums. It's like,
Yeah.
would you list a house for sale without without a price? That
Yeah.
makes zero sense. Or just to your point on the accords, even if you just, it's like, it's the listing, right? It's listing your risk. That's what you're doing. So one person could come out with a real crappy listing, one real estate agent, and no one's going to show up to that open house, versus you could have a listing over here that has beautiful pictures, a video, a great detailed write-up, and who's going to come to that open house, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and so we've done that, and then we'll show, so we use launch in our process. I think a lot of people know that, which I know Caleb's talked to you about, but
Yeah.
there's some graphical outputs that you can have come from launch, and then we'll talk to the client about how this is the type of thing that we're showing to a client, along with the accord forms. Like, you got to have that gives them the information, but that's the data. We want to show them the reason why they should get excited about your account, to use your word. And just even showing that stuff to a client, it shows that, like, you're different, you're thoughtful, you're not just, filling them full of a BS story. It's, here's how we do it.
Yep.
Here's how we tell your story different. Here's what we're showing to the underwriter. A lot of the things we'll talk to a client about is, like, we need to give that underwriter comfort, confidence that when they write that policy, you're not going to turn around and be a crappy account, because somebody's going to be yelling at their boss is going to be yelling at them. His boss is yelling at them. Why is this account not profitable, and all the things? Well, we all know that stuff can happen.
Yep.
If we have presented the client with a plan that says, hey, we've kind of pre-underwritten this, we know that there's these things missing, right? The client is agreeing. So say, like, subcontract language or something, right? Like,
Sure.
client knows that their subcontract is a little bit deficient. We need your help, carrier, to help us get the right language in place. But the client's committing that if we move to you within 90 days in our action plan, we're going to get that shored up, right?
Yeah.
That goes a long ways too, because then underwriters are much more confident that we're going to get the right things in place and they can help us do it, so that, we're minimizing their risk long term. Those are all things that got to go into that conversation.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's 100%. I mean, that's and I just don't think a lot of agents, especially younger agents, probably have those conversations to that. And
Yeah.
it's kind of a skill to have those conversations naturally, or just kind of, like in a
Totally.
first meeting, right? When you're trying to win an account. But I
Yeah.
think that's where being around people who've done it before, and listening to podcasts like this or whatever, and just practicing, right? And getting better at talking
Yeah.
about kind of that, how things work, and educating clients. It goes a long way. The
Perfect.
transparency is huge.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Well, as we kind of wrap up here, I do want you to tell everybody about Max Revenue. I'm guessing everybody has heard about it. If they haven't, they need to. Where can they find what you guys are doing on that end?
Yeah, so a couple different ways. We have a podcast that's weekly, and that's Spotify. We have a YouTube channel that I do a bunch of. We have some longer form videos. We have a bunch of video shorts, and we put our podcasts up there too. Just the Max Revenue YouTube channel. You can just search it, and then we have a weekly newsletter as well that Trey, my business partner, he writes that. And then yeah, that's kind of what we got going on. So it's fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it started as the anonymous max revenue channel, and
Yeah,
now
yeah.
cat's out of the bag, right?
Well, everyone thought it was. I had so many people messaging me and like, "Hey, man, are you Max Rev?" I was like, "I am not." I said, "I don't know why you think I am, but I am not." And I knew it was Trey pretty early on because I think like a week or two in, he told me he's like, "I'm staying anonymous." I'm like, "Cool, dude." And then he wrote me into doing the podcast, and I think he had to stop being anonymous because I think LinkedIn
Yeah,
doesn't like
anonymous.
not spam accounts, but just anonymous type of accounts, and so he had to break the anonymity. But yeah,
Uh,
it was fun while it lasted, I think.
yeah, totally. Totally. Well, that's great, man. Appreciate your time. Anything that we didn't cover that you think's relevant for everybody out there? Or...
Oh man, no, I feel like we covered a lot of good stuff. I mean, I think I would take away that it's a still kind of a numbers game,
Yep.
and just get comfortable talking with clients and being transparent about how the game of insurance works and the process behind the scenes. And I think the more transparent people can be with prospects, it'll help build trust, even if it's not necessarily in your best interest.
All right.
It'll help build a ton of trust. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Awesome, man. Well, thanks again for the time. And I think we covered a lot of ground. I think this was a great episode. A little bit of a master class for the sales side. So that's awesome. But
Cool.
thank you everybody for listening, and we will be back next week with another show.
Adios.